Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Jeffrey Epstein is not the only person connected to President Trump under federal law enforcement scrutiny today. Remember this guy? His name is Elliot Broidy. He is the big RNC fundraiser who, like Donald Trump, also reportedly had an affair with a Playboy model. To cover it up, he also reportedly used the president's longtime fixer, Michael Cohen, to arrange a hush money payment to said Playboy model. And according to a lawsuit filed against him, he reportedly coerced that woman into having an abortion after getting her pregnant. You know, RNC dude. That guy, Elliot Broidy, was also once the deputy finance chair of the Republican National Committee. Now, his co-deputy finance chair was the one and only Michael Cohen, who arranged the hush money payment and now sits in federal prison. And both of them reported to then RNC finance chair Steve Wynn, the now disgraced casino magnate accused of sexual assault and sexual harassment, who was forced to leave the RNC because of those lurid misconduct allegations. But that has not stopped from continuing to donate tons of money to the RNC. Well, Elliot Broidy now appears to be the subject of another investigation in relation to his role as the vice chair of President Trump's inaugural committee. Associated Press exclusively reporting that a federal grand jury in New York is looking into whether he used his position as vice chair of the president's inaugural committee to drum up foreign business deals, which is illegal.
It is Wednesday, the 10th of July of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid me of this priest? And while you're at it, I have put together this wonderful egg dish with a velvety hollandaise sauce. What better way to be smothered, huh? As they say. Well, listen, this is a very special day. The bulk of the hour is going to be taken up with my discussion yesterday at the chef's table. Right after yesterday's show, I sat down at the chef's table with Ian Reifowitz, and we discussed his newest book. So we're going to get right into these news reads. So let me tell you what they are here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Virginia GOP lawmakers revolted against making government buildings safer, and why wouldn't they? Because they're the GOP. The Ohio GOP is forcing public schools to lie to kids about health care because the more you know, the more you know. And Pennsylvania's Democratic governor stopped the latest Republican voter suppression scheme. Good for him. And of course, after the break, as I mentioned earlier, we then moved to the chef's table, where I sat down earlier with Ian and we discussed his newest book, The Tribalization of Politics, How Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on Obama Paved the Way for Trump. And as a side note, Ian will be signing books at Netroots Nation in Philadelphia on Thursday, that's tomorrow, 11 July, 12:30 p.m. local time at the Town Square Stage. All that, plus the bulk of the hour with Ian Reifowitz on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the rightish of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln, though her monitoring will be abbreviated because she is indeed at Netroots Nation as well. So if you happen to be in Philadelphia, we're on Radio Row. Check out our banner. She's already got some interviews lined up, and she'll be roaming around taking in the panels and finding more people and causes to interview about. Emily Singer of Share Blue Media brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, it looks like state Senate Republicans in Virginia voted to abandon an effort to pass gun control measures, and this is after 12 people were shot dead at a municipal building in Virginia Beach back in June. A special session was called by Democratic Governor Ralph Northam to pass gun control measures, but the brouhaha began when Senate Majority Leader Thomas Norment, a Republican, introduced the measure that would ban guns in municipal buildings. That enraged Senate Majority Whip Bill Stanley, who resigned in protest. So they decided to adjourn the session before it even began. Now none of these measures will come up until after the election, which could be detrimental to the Republican efforts to continue to control Virginia. Oliver Willis of Share Blue Media brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Speaking of the separation of church and state, Ohio is joining in full force in this war on women. They are now directing their propaganda at school children, where the curriculum will, according to Ohio Republicans, it hasn't been passed yet, they propose anti-abortion language and the concept of when life begins, according to their belief, will be part of the curriculum. The fight continues to keep that from happening. Danielle McLean of Think Progress brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Pennsylvania's Governor Tom Wolf stopped Republicans from sneaking a long-desired voter suppression measure into a bill that would have funded needed upgrades to the state's vulnerable voting machines. Republicans tried to push through a measure that would have eliminated straight party ticket voting. Wolf vetoed the measure. These electronic voting machines do need upgrades, and he is committed to replacing all of them with paper ballots, as the founders originally intended. All right, let's get to our break, and when we come back from the break, we're going to go through weather from around the world and finish up with Ian Reifowitz at the chef's table. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. For all of you out there, that is my P-tape. Let it rain on down. Well, there's not much rain here in southern Oregon. Current temperature is at 62 degrees with a slated high of 88. And we will have mostly cloudy conditions throughout the day, clearing up somewhat tomorrow. London is 78 and partly cloudy. Paris is 81 and sunny. Rome is 75 degrees and partly cloudy. Kiev is 68 and fair. Kabul is 87 and fair. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 68 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 52 and clear. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 82 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. and that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Well, we are sitting here at the chef's table with Ian Reifowitz, a professor of history at Empire State College of the University of New York. And in terms of the old fairness doctrine, we should divulge that Ian and I know each other from our habitual hanging out at the front porch on Black Co's, a subgroup of Daily Co's. And welcome, Ian. It's great to have you.
It's great to be here. You know, I always love talking with you, Justice. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a while. I should also mention that we've been on some various panels on other shows. So actually, it hasn't been that long because we were on Tim Corrimal's show not terribly long ago. So
right.
That's right.
Right. The last time I was on with you, I think, was a couple of years ago, maybe.
Yeah. So in another formation of this long-running show on this long-running radio station. So it's great. Hey, so you have a new book out. I apologize. I don't know why I've been calling it The Tribalization of American Politics. It might be because of the flag motif on the cover of your book. But regardless, The Tribalization of Politics. And it's about Rush Limbaugh and his impact on that tribalization. First of all, you know what? I always like to define terms, and I apologize if this is too much of an obvious answer, but what is tribalization?
Well, there's nothing to apologize for, and it's an important question, and it is one that I define in the book. So, I'm sorry that the flag threw you off.
No, I love it, but I just don't. When I think of tribalization of politics, I'm so, well, shall we say, Western dominated here in the United States. So everything revolves around us.
Sure.
So,
it's the tribalization of politics, how Rush Limbaugh's race baiting rhetoric on the Obama presidency paved the way for Trump. And let me give you the definition of tribalization that I used in the book. Although, let me just quickly mention that my sort of secret working subtitle of the book was, I've gone through 8 years of Rush Limbaugh show transcripts, so you don't have to.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that.
All right. But so I wrote, tribalization refers to a transformation much more profound than merely convincing Americans to be partisans who vote based on a shared set of policy preferences. It means cleaving America in two, and in the case of Limbaugh, creating a conservative tribe animated somewhat by political ideology, but more so by racial and cultural resentment that feeds a hatred of the opposing tribe. When speaking about Obama, Limbaugh's primary goal was to advance the tribalization of our politics. So, yeah, that's what I'm getting at. It's about hatred. It's about getting people to feel that their political opponents or those on the other side of the political aisle are really their enemies in a sort of visceral way. It's about much more than a debate over the appropriate, capital gains tax rate, as important as that is. Right. It's really about this idea coming from Limbaugh that the left and Obama, certainly from the years 2009 to 2016, the left is embodied by its leader, Barack Obama, that they are an opposing tribe, an opposing, more than that, a group that is looking to hurt you, certainly as much as possible within the political system. And the you there, of course, is Limbaugh's audience, which is overwhelmingly white, conservative, and disproportionately male, and overwhelmingly Christian. And so Barack Obama and his tribe are looking to harm your interests and looking to use the political system to take a bite out of your hide and to diminish your standing, to harm your family, to take away your money, and certainly to take away your power, and and perhaps even support those who would harm you directly, physically, through some kind of violence. And there are aspects of the book about that as well, where Limbaugh, links Obama to whether it's radical black nationalists or in terms of the more direct violence in the United States in the last few years. We have the threat, the very hyped up threat of terrorism from Muslims or from Islamic fundamentalists. Limbaugh talks at length about Obama being some kind of Muslim sympathizer, or even hints at him being a secret Muslim. So that's another element of the tribalization. Obviously, I could just go on and talk, but I'd rather take it in directions that you want it to go. So it's not just a
well. Also, this, and you spell this out in your book, that obviously this racial animus, race baiting, predated Limbaugh by many decades, but your study really begins with Limbaugh, and it doesn't begin, I remember him on the Sacramento station, and this was back when I was doing, more, public and college radio. So that sort of shock jock radio was anathema to everything that we believed in what radio should be. And I should confess, I believe I put myself into a silo of sorts and really could not listen to the guy. You read transcripts, and you also specified because, well, really, who can listen to this guy for that long, without it impacting you at some point? But this race baiting, predated Limbaugh, but you really start just about around Obama's time, and I actually had wondered at the animus against Obama before he was really a viable candidate. But really, Limbaugh had started sowing that seed, which had already been fruited after many decades. Is he a charlatan? Is he a huckster? I know you say you don't care about what his motivation is, but you also, and I remember this clearly too in the history of Limbaugh, snapping at a female caller about getting the bone out of her nose. I mean, this is when he was a sports guy way back. Did he recognize his id, and this is the way to make money off of it, and it's all part of a whole? Does that matter? I know it doesn't matter, but
right. I mean, look, to some degree, and I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to try to get into his head. And I did mention some of those early examples, as you said. I wanted to focus specifically on the Obama presidency for a couple of reasons. One is that my previous book, Obama's America, was sort of in some ways a precursor to this book, and I looked at Obama, and I had the familiarity about Obama. I wanted to have a coherent time frame to look at. Limbaugh's rhetoric during the Bush presidency was going to be very different. In terms, I shouldn't say his rhetoric was different, but his focus was different, certainly. So I want to have a concrete, start and end date. My suspicion is that Limbaugh realized that, there's a reason why he shifted, as you said, from being a sports guy to being the person the kind of show he started airing in around 1988, or in the mid 80s, I guess. He went national in 1988, and that was because he could make more money. Right. But as you said, I did write that I don't really care, because at the end of the day, whether he's sitting there at night, repenting for saying these awful things that he doesn't really believe, or he's just a true believer who says exactly what he thinks, it doesn't matter, because the impact on American politics, on American society, is the same. And now, in terms of him, certainly not being the first one. I mean, look, this race baiting rhetoric goes all the way back to the beginning of American politics, and in its modern form, certainly we can say that it starts with Richard Nixon and the Southern Strategy in 1968. In focusing on Limbaugh during the Obama years, I think I wanted to do it because of some of the reasons I've said, but also because Limbaugh really did emerge in many ways as the leader of the Republican opposition to Obama in terms of the public face of it, at least. When Obama took office, there's this incident which I recount where Limbaugh was asked to produce a 400-word op-ed on his hopes for the Obama presidency, and he very famously said, "I only need 4 words. I hope he fails." Right. But then the other piece I wanted to do, which wasn't something I necessarily saw when I started the book, because when I came up with the idea for the book in the summer of 2015, American politics was very different. But by the time I had finished the research and was ready to write, I started seeing connections to the election of Trump. So that's a part of the title as well, is looking at how Limbaugh, in his rhetoric about Obama, in playing and preying on white racial resentment and white racial and cultural anxiety, talked about issues in ways that laid the groundwork for Trump to be able to come in and exploit a lot of the same issues, and certainly that same sentiment about white racial and cultural anxiety regarding demographic change, regarding to some degree, the degree of threat from Muslim terrorists, such as it exists, and numerous other issues that we can go into as well. So, I can take it backward to Nixon, but I also wanted to take it forward into the present with Trump.
Now, Limbaugh and Trump were neighbors in Florida. Did they move in social circles, or did they only bump into each other occasionally? Limbaugh's been called a kingmaker of sorts in years past. Would Trump have known about that? Would Limbaugh have seen Trump as a vehicle for more nefarious power grabs? But did they move in social circles in Florida?
So let me say that I didn't research the private sort of movements of these two guys. Mm-hmm. There have been photos of them playing golf together. So there's no question, obviously, that they knew about each other. Trump would call in to Limbaugh's show, and also Limbaugh had him on as a guest. And Limbaugh very rarely had guests, but Limbaugh did have him on as a guest. Going back into the 2012 campaign season, because there was talk about Trump running then, he did have Trump on his show. He didn't love Trump in 2011, 2012. He did mention that Trump was not a real, certainly his conservative bona fides were in doubt. Right. He talked about because Trump at that time talked mostly about China and trade. He didn't go that much into immigration at that time. That wasn't until the 2016 campaign, the summer 2015. So Trump was talking mostly about trade, and Limbaugh basically said, "Look, he doesn't seem to be a real conservative to me. Real conservatives don't put up tariffs." But Limbaugh said, "I like that Trump is fighting for American interests," and he mostly liked Trump because, in Limbaugh's words, he would take the fight to Obama in a way that sort of other Republicans weren't doing, according to Limbaugh. So he liked that aspect of Trump.
Now, a question I had about tribalization: does it take two to tango in this? Because the hate, the fear. Now, let me confess once again, I could not listen to a Howard Stern for very long, and I could not listen to a Limbaugh. It was just so toxic. I couldn't do it even in a professional capacity to try to research. It just, I did not have the capacity for it. So, I feel that this tribalization is one-sided. I mean, we have a political figure like Obama who constantly put his hand across the aisle and constantly got it, not only his hand slapped, but his face slapped too.
I think you're right.
I just don't, I don't look at my neighbors. Maybe I should, but I don't look at my neighbors who I know are Trump bro types thinking I need to fear for my life. Yet I got to tell you, sometimes when I take off the neverté, I see an initial wariness until they're put at ease. Oh, okay, well, he's okay. He can barbecue a chicken, that kind of thing. So this tribalization seems wholly one-sided, but has wholly been taken advantage of by the likes of a Limbaugh and his ilk.
I think you're right. I mean, certainly, the Democrats, mainstream Democratic progressives, do not seek to tribalize America for the most part, and certainly nowhere near to the degree that the right does, or that, let's say, that many on the right do. Certainly Limbaugh and Trump, in their own way. And what you said about Obama is exactly right. Now, I do think that his attempts to show empathy and to what I argued in my previous book and a bit in this one as well, to strengthen the bonds of community across lines of race and ideology and culture and religion and region. Those are important things to do. Those are positive things to do. The fact that Limbaugh and Trump and Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, in politics and in the media, for the most part, slapped his hand away, doesn't mean it wasn't the right thing to do. It also doesn't mean that it wasn't successful, because he did win re-election, and with a resounding majority. The first Democrat to break 50% in the popular vote, going back generations. Obviously, Bill Clinton had Ross Perot, who died as well. We should note an interesting end to that chapter of American politics. But anyway, no, I think the fact is that Trump, the tribalization is largely one-sided, not exclusively, but largely one-sided. And look, did it help Limbaugh build his career? Absolutely. Did it help Trump get elected president? I don't know. I don't know if Trump would have gotten more votes if he had tribalized a little less. Mm-hmm. Would have he gotten fewer votes versus Hillary Clinton? Or would he have gotten more? I don't know. But we do know this. He would not likely have won the Republican nomination without that kind of tribalizing rhetoric, especially on immigration, because that's what set him apart in the field. And I looked at some of the research out there from political scientists, and there was a very strong correlation between, for example, the degree to which a Republican primary voter felt that his or her white identity was important. There was a correlation between that feeling and whether or not they voted for Trump. The stronger feeling of white identity, it was almost a straight line up, a direct correlation to voting for Trump as opposed to Rubio or Ted Cruz or John Kasich or Jeb Bush or any of these other nominees. And then even at the general election level, I don't want to get the facts wrong. I'm trying to work off what I've written here, but there were three feelings that most strongly predicted whether a voter was going to go for Trump in 2016, and that was more strongly correlated with support for the Republican in the general election in 2016 versus support for the Republican in the general in 2012. Those three things were expressed through responses to surveys: racial resentment towards African Americans, negative feelings about immigrants, and or support for harsh policies towards undocumented immigrants, not wanting path to citizenship, etc. And then the third thing was negative feelings towards Muslims. People who expressed those three things, you were more likely to vote for the Republican in 2016 in November than in 2012. So again, there's evidence that there was some political benefit to stoking those feelings for Donald Trump.
Now, you used a term, racial priming, and as attributed to what Limbaugh did to Obama. I likened it to the Atwater model, where Lee Atwater stated that you can't use the N-word, or you start off using the N-word, but then you have to use the code words. And it seemed like, to me, Limbaugh, especially when Obama became a front runner, and certainly after he became president both times, that racial priming, the code words became less coded and more back to the N-word. And certainly since Trump has taken office, it seems like we have done a full circle Atwater. Do you consider this to be less coded? Is it just as coded? Am I overstating this? Are we really back to the N-word, or do we have a ways to go?
Well, because
it seems to me like Limbaugh's whole shtick was that look, we're in a little community. We're in a tribe. They all hate us, but we're together. And now it's more mainstream. Limbaugh and certainly Trump have given people the okay to just let it all out.
Yeah, I think we haven't gone back to the N-word, obviously, and you're not saying that we have. But I do think you can see a trend.
Because like thug politics, Chicago thug politics, or, just any of those, we know what that means.
Right. I mean, there's a quote that I use. I think it was from Jamel Bowie off the top of my head, who said basically that Chicago thug thug is the new N-word in terms of right-wing politics. So yeah, I think we were, there was a point again, and I'm not going to set up George W. Bush as a great guy or a great president, but there was a point where I think if you look at, to take the Atwater thing, right? You had the N-word, you had Nixon, the things he did. You had Reagan and, talking about states' rights in Philadelphia, Mississippi. We know what that meant. We had George H.W. Bush using Willie Horton. But then you started to see that, I think, at the presidential level fade a bit for whatever reasons. Maybe Republicans had a conscience about this, or who knows. I don't remember Bob Dole doing anything in particular in 96. W had other cultural issues, but he largely, I think, stayed away from race. You had McCain in 2008, who, for all his faults with picking Sarah Palin, did, have that incident. I believe it was in Minnesota where he corrected his supporter who said Obama's an Arab, whatever. So there was a point, I think, where it looked like that was really fading at the level of the presidential candidates. It never faded for Limbaugh, of course. But then with Obama, it just, it sort of exploded again. And I don't know that Trump used the word thug specifically about Obama, but certainly the things that Trump did, talking about, when he came down that escalator in July of 2015 at Trump Tower and talked about how Mexican immigrants were rapists and drug dealers and murderers. That was presidential rhetoric that we had not seen in a really long time, certainly going back to the 80s and maybe not even until 1968. So yeah, there's subtle code and then there's not so subtle code. And when he talked about the people at Charlottesville, where there were neo-Nazis on one side of a march and people protesting against neo-Nazis on the other side, and he says there's very fine people on both sides. Again, it's not using the N-word, but boy, it's not subtle either.
I've just noticed it on a local level, anecdotally, and I'm not going to purport this is, a constant, but I've noticed an uptick in friends and family who hold, these political viewpoints, who in times past might not have responded or endeavored into a political discussion because we're in polite company, and now it's in our face. So it's almost from the other side. One does not dare mention anything anti-Trump because of the reaction. I had a joke with some Trump people here that are flying their Trump 2020 flags if they were going to fly it above the Stars and Stripes on Dear Leader Day on the 4th, but I never got a response.
Well, no, I think you make a good point because I think what Trump has done is unleashed people's restraint, to some degree, that they feel, these racially resentful, culturally resentful folks feel, like Trump gives them license to act, to break boundaries that they maybe felt they couldn't break before. And honestly, they shouldn't be doing it, but we see this with and again, Limbaugh certainly did it first, and that reminds me of something else that I wanted to mention earlier that I just skipped over, which is that I remember that Trump, it was reported that Trump did a lot of, if not listening to talk radio, getting an understanding of where right-wing talk radio was, and that was where he got the idea to focus on immigration. If you look at Trump's rhetoric over time on immigration, there were certain things in terms of racism that Trump was consistent on. He had this terrible condemnation of the Central Park Five, African-American and Hispanic kids in New York who were falsely accused of a rape. It was a sort of a false confession, a coerced confession. Anyway, so Trump was all over that. The birther thing, he was all over that, obviously, from 2009, 2010 on. But he didn't really talk much about immigration as an issue until he started running for president. And from what I read, he saw that was a thing that really animated people on the right in terms of listeners to talk radio and hosts on talk radio. And it was one of the things Limbaugh talked a lot about. And so there, I think, is a way of seeing that connection, to some degree, at least directly. But people like Limbaugh were talking about American sovereignty being destroyed by the open borders of the Obama presidency, supposedly talking about the demographic change in the country, what people on progressives talk positively about, something about the browning of America. That is something that Limbaugh has been trying to scare his audience about for a long time. And I think Trump picked up on that very, very clearly. And we saw during, since Trump has emerged, there was this example, I believe it was in Boston. It was where a couple of guys beat up an older guy who they assumed was Latino, and they did it while shouting, essentially, go Trump or something along those lines, Trump-inspired rhetoric. There's there's a direct example of that. We have other examples of hate crimes being committed by people who have used pro-Trump rhetoric as well. Specifically, even though it's the Tree of Life murderer who killed the 11 people at the synagogue in Pittsburgh talked about immigration as a threat, talked about demographic change as a threat. He wasn't specifically going along Trump's lines, but he was using rhetoric that certainly matches where Trump has gone and certainly where Limbaugh has gone. Again, not to put the responsibility for the blood of those people directly on Limbaugh or Trump's hands, but certainly that rhetoric, it matches the kinds of ideas that Limbaugh and Trump have been spewing.
The more I think about tribalization, because I've had this sort of joking response with members from the other side about why do they hate America and Americans. And that's because the America and Americans I have in my mind's eye skews more towards the rave scene in the Matrix than a lily white Midwestern scene of a Rockwell painting, say. Is there a way to? I don't know. I think that my vision is more true. Is that tribalization?
No, that's not tribalization. It's inclusion. It's the opposite of tribalization.
Exactly.
Right. But no,
so how do we get people? And this is the other argument. I'm sorry for jumping around, but since I'm back, I lived in a cosmopolitan, international city of San Francisco for over 30 years. So now I'm back into small town America, back in my home state of Oregon. And what I'm coming to conclude is that it's not that we as the cosmopolitans don't understand small town rural America. It's the other way around. How do we get people to see this more inclusive part of society as not being, or America as not being the threat that they've been racially primed for? Or are they just lost causes and we can only, I don't know, chip away at the margins, the vast numbers of those already? We have to give up on them. I don't, you have some more positive summations about how we can, overcome all of that negativity, of course, but are they lost causes? Can we change that?
Well, I think chipping away at the margins is underrated. All right. It's not going to happen overnight, but it certainly generationally, there's something going on in a more positive direction, I would say. But, there are things that first of all, I think we are succeeding slowly but surely. Granted, Trump won the election, but remember, he lost by 3 million votes. And if the election had been held before Comey's letter came out, he would have lost, I think, probably by 5 or 6 million votes, and he would have had a relatively strong electoral college performance and a victory by Hillary Clinton. So, even looking at Trump's numbers, He really didn't do any better among white Americans overall than Mitt Romney did 4 years earlier. He did worse among better educated white Americans and better among lower, white Americans with lower educational status. But anyway, so yeah, I did talk about some positive things moving forward. I don't have any sort of grand sociological answer about how to move people in a big way. But I think what I'm focused on is politics, electoral politics. We make change in America by winning elections and then having the power legislatively to make those changes, administratively through the executive branch, wherever. And so looking into some of the research that's been done, in particular by the folks over at Demos, which is a terrific organization, progressive organization, led by a professor at Berkeley named Ian. This project is led by Berkeley law professor Ian Haney-Lopez. They did a lot of research about what kind of messages work. And the long story short is that there is a message that can work to bring back some of these, let's say, racially resentful white voters, but it has to be a message that doesn't also turn off, voters of color, more progressive voters. You've got to have a realistic message. You can't just say, "Oh, race doesn't matter. Please come back and vote for us." That's, first of all, it's not correct. Race does matter, and second of all, you can't have that kind of blind, racism blind or race blind, whatever you want to call it, message that only talks about economic issues. That doesn't work either. So what Dr. Lopez and the folks at Demos found was that you have to connect racial and economic issues and expose what Republicans like Limbaugh and Trump are doing. And so essentially what you do is you say, rather than say Trump's a racist, don't vote for him, right? Which is sort of a economically blind message, let's say. And there was, you looked at the campaign of Hillary Clinton in 2016, not to bash the Clinton campaign, but the study, political scientist Dr. Vavrek over at UCLA looked at the campaign commercials and found that only 9% of the campaign commercials touched on economic issues in the general election stage. The average going back to the beginning of TV campaigns for president is around 30, I believe 32%. So around 30%. Trump's was much higher than Hillary's. Anyway, to go back to the Demos research, what they found was rather than just say Trump's a racist, he's a bad guy, don't vote for him, vote for the non-racists, which is essentially Hillary Clinton's Stronger Together message. What you need to do is say, look at what Republicans are doing with this racist rhetoric. They're trying to get you, middle class, working class, white voters, to be more worried about them, those people, the brown people, the whatever. And the reason why they're doing that is to distract you from the fact that they're really going to pick your pockets and they're going to send money up the economic ladder. So it's not just saying they're racist. What you're saying is they're playing you for a fool with this racial rhetoric, right? Now that message shows that the progressives it also shows voters of color that the progressives candidates are very aware of the racial rhetoric and that they reject the racial rhetoric. But it also shows the white voters that they don't just reject the racial rhetoric because it's bad. They reject the racial rhetoric because it's a distraction from the economic policies that Republicans don't want you to know about. And look at what Trump has ended up doing. What has his major accomplishment been thus far? It's been this billionaire's tax cut. So it all goes back to this idea, really going back to Lyndon Johnson, who had this famous quote that you probably are familiar with, that your readers may be familiar with, where Lyndon Johnson once said, quote, "If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him someone to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you." And that's the quotation. What I argue is that Limbaugh's rhetoric really works along a parallel track. If you can convince these sort of middle and working class whites that he should be afraid of blacks or afraid of other non-white Americans, that he won't notice that the Republicans, are really picking his pocket.
I'm so old, I predate even Lyndon Johnson because Bob Dylan wrote Pawn in the Game, which was essentially the same message.
Well, sure. Bob Dylan, absolutely another great, analyst of American politics and society. But I'm not familiar with him, I don't think, to the degree that you are. One
way of becoming wise, I've noticed, is just the osmosis part of getting old. And, Yeah, I used to teach history. Now I can remember it.
Although it doesn't seem that Donald Trump's longevity on this planet has given him any more wisdom, nor has Limbaugh's.
Which brings back another question or concern that I have is that I don't find a whole lot of critical thinkers being enamored with a Limbaugh, and certainly not a Trump, though Trump did score relatively high with a certain segment of college-educated whites. Now the people that you were talking about in terms just here, about these economic issues and how they're being manipulated by race, I consider that to be more of the margins, because I don't have enough time in the day to bring up facts that are just going to be discounted no matter what. If you say up is up, they'll say down is down. And, so to me, that's the lost cause. What I'm finding in small town rural America is there's a lot of progressives and liberals and Democrats who are hunkered down, and finding them and getting them activated, and, at some point getting enough where you can get somebody on the city council's planning commission and go from there, on the student or the school board, and go from there. So I had a point I was going to make here.
I'm with you. No, I mean, I think you're right. That's what the message that I talked about is not going to be the whole of a political campaign, but it can be a strong element of it, because, like I said, the research shows from these surveys that they did that it's a message that reaches both progressives and voters of color and these, for lack of a better word, maybe these Obama-Trump voters, right? People who voted for Obama but then switched over to vote for Trump, who maybe can go either way. And we're, it's not like we need to swing that many people to swing a few states and win a presidential election, or, in some of these congressional districts, swing enough congressional districts to take the majority in 2018. Well, we swung them. You got to win a few seats to win the Senate majority. Obviously, there are different messages in different races, right. and that's a national message. That's not a local message.
The one universal that I find, and this has been since I was a small child, maybe it's wrong to try to give a black and white definition of all this, but a schism between the more liberal mind and the more conservative mind. And this is one, it's a hard nut to crack to try to convince otherwise. To me, when we talk about equal protection, due process, the metaphor was that that's all boats rising together. In the conservative mind, they see that their yacht is sinking down into this morass below them rather than the water bringing everything up. And I've always tried to, now I don't call that an economic viewpoint. It's more philosophical to me. That's a materialist viewpoint. How does one overcome this materialist viewpoint so that one has, it will then be imbued with, the ideals of American civic duty and service and all of that, rather than I'm losing something?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great metaphor. I think the thing is that you're not going to get hardcore conservatives, the kind of people who vote Republican every time. That's not who a Democratic politician should be aiming at, pretty much ever. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I think the key is that the tribalizing rhetoric that I've been talking about here is something that appeals to people emotionally, right? It gets the whole sort of fear part of the brain, active. I think it's the amygdala. I don't remember. I'm not a neuroscientist here, but it gets that part of the brain active. And then once that fear and anger is activated and the sort of fight or flight response emerges, they can't hear anything else, right? They can't hear your data. They can't hear your other rational arguments. So what I think the Demos rhetoric, the Demos research found is that kind of persuasive technique diffuses and almost provides some protection for those voters against the tribalizing rhetoric, because they hear it and they go, and rather than react to it by going to that fight or flight place, they go, damn, that's just more of those people playing me for a fool. And so they can block it out. And then once they block it out, they can have those other, they can be appealed to in those other ways. That certainly, it's not going to appeal to a wealthy person whose approach to politics is about preserving their own yacht, but it can appeal to a middle class person who can say, geez, I'm not going to let them distract me by ridiculous talk about Mexican rapists and forget about the fact that the Republicans, really just want to get rid of my, healthcare guarantee for pre-existing conditions, or my access to subsidies on the Obamacare exchange, or any of those things that are more practical. Once you can defuse the fear, you can then appeal to those voters with progressive policies and also progressive values. That a rising tide does lift all boats. And to go back to metaphors, the other metaphor for the Republicans is that I've seen. I think it's that Paul Krugman has used and others. You got three people in a room: a white billionaire, a white working class guy, and a black guy. And somebody puts out 12 cookies on the table, right? And the white millionaire takes 11 of the cookies, puts them in his bag, then looks at the white guy and says that the black guy is there to take your cookie.
There you go.
Right? The key is to get the white guy to say, Jesus Christ, the other guy just took 11 frickin' cookies. Mm-hmm. Maybe if I get together with the black guy, we can outvote him and get some of those cookies back.
Well, but we're not going to do that by giving up and taking on that right-wing rhetoric either. Do we have the rhetorical pushback? I mean, we don't necessarily have Lackoff leading our fight in this necessarily. I mean, every time I hear illegal alien, I always say, "Oh, you mean undocumented?" Is that going to be enough? Do we need to be more learned? Do we need to have some leading lights teaching us the rhetoric to overcome this? Because we're certainly not going to do it by saying, "Oh yeah, all those illegals, we got to learn how to live with illegals." That's not humanity as I define it, and that's the defining schism between, the hateful rhetoric and our more inclusive democratic ideal. Exactly.
No, we're not going to go down that road. And again, not that it's a silver bullet, but when I found it was published, this research that showed that this kind of rhetoric works. Hey, you're playing us for the fool, or hey, I should say, hey, the Republicans are playing you for the fool with this racial rhetoric. That approach works. Mm-hmm. And so if political campaigns are going to listen, then I think there is hope. I know Dr. Lopez has a book coming out, well in time for the 2018 election. By the time that the primaries are over, his book should be out. So I think that's an important piece. But the research is already out there. I tried to identify the racial rhetoric, but I also wanted to point a way forward by pointing to some of this other research. Again, we can do it. It's just a matter of whether we will do it. Barack Obama showed how to do it successfully. He's certainly not the only one capable of doing it. I'm hoping that some of our Democrats are out there ready to do it. I think Elizabeth Warren has an ability to talk about the issues in that way. I think Biden probably is good at pointing out the Republican. It would be good at, hopefully has a potential to be good at pointing out Republican efforts to divide and to play people for the fool. It's not something that's connected to any particular policy, so it should be something that any Democrat would be able to incorporate into their own campaign rhetoric, even before they go into their policies. Because it's pointing out what Republicans are doing and the hateful things that Republicans are doing and the impact that those things have on our society. And it really is. It's really an insult when Republicans do this. It's an insult to voters because we know from the data, for example, that undocumented immigrants don't commit more crimes than the native born. They commit crimes at a lower rate than the native born. That's for both documented and undocumented immigrants. We know that from the data that living in an area with a above average rate of undocumented immigrants is actually a safer area to live in because of the fact that they do commit these crimes at a lower rate than the native born. that means you are safer if you live in that area. But if you only hear Trump and Limbaugh, you hear the opposite. You hear the opposite. So what we need to do is not just say they're lying, but say, here's why they're lying. They're lying because they don't want you to know they're going to pick your pocket.
Do you think, well, I'm not just another confession here. I'm not a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell, but his term tipping point is apropos. Do you think we've reached a tipping point now with the Limbaugh, Trump rhetoric? You know, there's always going to be the hardcore, and I see it here in my little small town. There's going to be some hardcore people who have said that father and that toddler deserved to drown. What were they doing coming here? But there's many, many more who are, if not offended, shocked. It tugs at something. Do you think we've reached that tipping point? I mean, I know it's early in the election cycle here, but is that going to transfer to people going to the polling booth?
I mean, I sure as hell hope so. It's not, on the one hand, you could say Trump's approval rating hasn't dropped in the last few weeks with these, I guess it's in the last 7 to 10 days, as we've seen this new, much starker examples of real terrible things happening at the border. But maybe it's not dropping because he's just got that core. It's not going up either.
Right.
He's got that core, and I don't think that core is enough for him to win re-election. Arguably, it wasn't really enough for him to win the first time. Again, he lost by 3 million, the popular vote. The election is not necessarily a way to measure where the country is, because it's very it's just yes or no. Trump win, Trump lose. Either Trump wins or Trump loses. But we're talking about fine gradations here in terms of public opinion.
But of course, we're looking at the top. I think maybe another more accurate measure would be all the down tickets, and we've already seen the impact of that as pushback against this rhetoric of hate, and I would just call it un-American activities.
Well, that's right. And yes, in 2018, the Republicans closed the last month of the midterm elections with the caravan, which you notice we're not hearing about that anymore, and all this terrible stuff about undocumented immigrants and immigrants in general, and some real awful racial rhetoric, in races across the country. Virginia certainly was one example where, you had that, was it Corey Stewart, who was essentially an open white supremacist or almost open white supremacist, whatever. And that rhetoric didn't help them at all. They got smashed in the 2018 elections. So, we'll find out, but in 2020, but those elections certainly gave us hope.
Of course, pork barrel works even if it's from a Russian oligarch dumping money in Kentucky. So there's that too.
No question about that.
Well, thank you, Ian. Do you want to sum up about where we can find your book and where else you're going to be?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on. The book, again, is The Tribalization of Politics, How Rush Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on the Obama Presidency Paved the Way for Trump. You can buy it directly from the publisher, who is IG Publishing. You can also get it on Amazon and any of your normal sort of online places. It is carried in some bookstores if people actually go out to bookstores anymore, but certainly it's we're fans of bookstores. Good. They have they actually have performances and readings and stuff.
Well,
yeah, and I've done some. I've been very lucky. Barnes and Noble has had me do a couple of readings at their bookstores in New York, which I've been thrilled about. And for anybody who's going to be at Netroots Nation in Philadelphia, I hope lots of listeners are going to be there. I will be doing a book event there Thursday at 12:30 at the town. What is it called? The Town Square Stage. People can get their books at the bookstore booth right across from the town stage. I believe it's Uncle Bobby's bookstore, booth 133. They can get books there. Come across the stage. I'll be talking about the book, taking some questions, and signing copies for those who have them. And I'm very happy to do that. So that's this Thursday, 12:30 at Netroots Nation in Philadelphia. And you can always check me out on Daily Kos. I'm a contributing editor there, so I have a front page post every Sunday.
And we'll certainly put the link up on my show notes and links diary on Daily Co's for West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And I should also mention, too, folks, do pick up the book Tribalization of Politics by Ian Reifowitz. There's also a foreword by Marcos.
Ooh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, so, and I got to tell you, for forewords, that was, I thought that was a rather comprehensive summation, and it made me want to read even more of the book, which is what a foreword's supposed to do.
Yeah, he did a great job. I was really grateful for him.
Thank you so much, Ian, and hope to have you back on this and other subjects in the future.
I would look forward to it, Justice. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know that Netroots Radio is going to be broadcasting on. In fact, we're going to meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.